This is a tutorial of single fiber EMG Plus in Sierra 4.0. To launch this test, go to the navigator, choose either the All Tests or Muscles tab, select single fiber EMG Plus or the stimulated version, and then choose the muscle that you want to examine. The run stop on the base unit will start and stop acquisition. Every time you push stop, all the data is automatically saved, so when you push run again, you can be assured that the previous data that you collected is saved until you delete it. The single fiber EMG Plus live window is where you can see all of the data that's being acquired. This window is recording everything, not just what's being triggered. The triggered traces window is only displaying the motor units that are actually crossing the trigger line in the live window. The trigger line is set by default to auto mode, and this means it's going to automatically adjust up and down to isolate the biggest motor unit. So you can see here there's multiple motor units firing, but the auto trigger is just isolating the biggest motor unit here, and that's what's being displayed in the trigger traces window. The peak plot window is showing you all of the traces that are being acquired, as well as how many peaks are being analyzed. You can see there's 2 peaks, and this is set for 100, so we have at least 100 data points or traces being acquired. Once this peak plot window is full, you can stop the data acquisition by hitting run stop, and then you can start looking at the data you've acquired. Something new in 4.0 is the ability to see an overview trace in the trigger traces window. This is an option that can be turned on or off with this button in the top right corner. The overview trace is nice because you can see the live EMG data as it's acquired without having to look over to the live window. The green box in the overview trace shows you how much of that mode unit is displayed in the trigger traces window, so that correlates with the sweep setting. If you adjust the sweep setting, you'll notice that box gets wider or more narrow. Also new in 4.0 is the ability to show the triggered traces in both a rastered and overlay view at the same time. So that's this button here that allows you to display the trigger traces that are visible in the window in both raster and overview. This button is to raster. If you aren't using this option, you can raster or overlay those traces manually. The number of traces displayed here can be set up in the cogwheel. This pink bar in the peak plot window represents how many of these traces are displayed in the trigger traces window, and the pink line shows you which trace is currently highlighted. So I can drag this line up or down, and you can see this pink trace corresponds with this pink line. You can also review through the traces by using the slide bar on the right-hand side of the trigger traces window. When analyzing the traces, for most efficiency, it's best to start in the peak plot window and first adjust your window size to eliminate any erroneous or bad data from your acquisition. So in this case, I can decrease the height of this window, and as I drag it down, you'll notice it automatically narrows the left and right windows for me, because those are always going to be 2 standard deviations of data. So first, adjust how much data you want to look at. I'm just going to eliminate that top section, and if you want to, you can eliminate anything on the other end as well, just by clicking and dragging up and down. You can also manually adjust the left and right side of the box if you want to include or exclude any outliers that is found. Next, you can come into the All Traces window and quickly clean up any noise or artifact by just clicking and dragging an Exclude box. Anything in this red box will be automatically excluded from the data set. So here, if we come down here, that cleans up some of these noisier traces. If you look, this number shows you how many traces you have left in your data set. So we have 76 traces. If you look into the trigger traces window, you see some of these traces are gray, and that just means that they've been excluded. If you want to bring back any traces that have been excluded, simply click any of these reanalyze icons that you see, and that will reanalyze the data set, and now everything's back in the data. And then I can come back in, readjust the window of data that I want to keep, and then clean up any data that I want to clean up here. You can also clean up data in smaller sets of data. So this, like I said, is showing you just the 10 traces that are visible in the trigger trace window overlaid. So as I roll through these, if there's any thing I want to clean up, rather than looking at all the data at once, I can look at individual sets of 10 and clean it up that way. If I want to get rid of the entire set of data, so in case this whole window were 10 traces of data, I could either draw a box over that whole data set, or I could use the knobs to include or exclude entire sets of data or individual traces of data. So the yellow knob will run through the data 1 trace at a time, and the purple knob will roll through the data 10 traces at a time. Pushing either of those knobs will exclude that entire data set or that individual trace. You can choose whichever method you want to clean up the data. Once the data has been cleaned up, you can refer to the results table to see the final results. Here we can see that this was a single run, and there was only one pair because there was 2 peaks, and you can see how many samples were collected. There were no blocking, and the jitter was 21. We're going to go ahead and collect some more data to look at other aspects of the software. So I'm just going to push run stop. I'm going to choose a different EMG file to look at here. So here, at this point, you'd be adjusting your needle slightly and having the patient give a slight contraction, so you can find a motor unit that has more than 1 peak, so that you can measure the jitter between those peaks. So here we've found a motor unit with 2 peaks, and this looks like it does have a little bit of jitter in it. We can see as we're running our jitter value here in the second peak, it's showing you a jitter value of between 60 and 70. We can stop once we have that peak plot window full. We're going to push stop, do any cleanup that's necessary. In this case, the data set that I have is pretty clean. You can see that in the all traces window. So then I'm just going to hit run stop to start acquiring another run of data. So in this case, we have a motor unit with multiple peaks in it. The settings in the analyzer are set to be very liberal, so it's going to try to put a cursor on any peak that it's replicating. And then in this case, it's up to the user to exclude or remove any peaks that aren't valid or don't meet criteria. One thing that's good to see is here in the overview trace, we can see that this motor unit actually has more peaks than what are visible in the trigger traces window, because the green box shows you the visible sweep. So this is a good way to know when we may want to increase the sweep so that we can see all the peaks in that motor unit. It's only going to be analyzing peaks that are visible in the trigger traces window, so if the peak is not visible, it won't be adding a cursor to it, and it won't be part of our data set. Again, once the peak plot window is full, we can go ahead and hit stop, and then we can look at this data set here. In this case, if we wanted to exclude one of these peaks, like this green one, we may not want to use it because it's not quite as sharp as the rest of them. So if we wanted to exclude this peak, simply look for that color, which is a light green, and come over here and just uncheck this box here, and that'll remove that peak from the data set, and then reorder all the rest of the peaks. If you want to add a peak, you simply click and drag a box around that peak, and it adjusts the settings to include that peak in the data set. If the peak still isn't included even after the adjustment, try dragging out further and it'll increase the duration, and then that may add the cursors you want. To remove that peak that you just added, again, just go over to the peak plot window and uncheck that box. If you go to the cogwheel, you have the option to have automatic blocking on or off. If this is on, then it will automatically mark peaks as blocking when the jitter is present and the peak is appearing and disappearing in the data set. If the auto blocking is turned off, then you'll want to manually mark any peak that seems to be blocking. So if you see blocking in a peak and you don't have the auto blocking turned on, then you just check the blocking in that particular peak, and it will add blocking to the data set here. You can uncheck blocking as well. For the blocking to work or the highlighted jitter values to work, you need to make sure you have reference limits set up in the test protocol setup. So here we're happy with this data. We may want to come in and exclude some of this data that may be throwing off our numbers a little bit, but everything else looks pretty good. So we're going to go ahead and hit run, which will start acquiring the next set of data. So here's another peak. I'm gonna look at a more different data set here. So again, you'd just be adjusting your needle slightly. You want really minimal activation of the muscle, and try to find a mode unit that has multiple peaks to measure from. So here we've allowed the peak plot window to fill up, so we know we have enough traces to collect data from. We're going to pause that. Now, one thing to be aware of is, and I can show this in the cogwheel, that we have auto select reference peak enabled. What that means is it's picking which peak to choose as the reference peak that gives the least amount of jitter. So in this case, this blue peak here, you can see it's not jittering at all because that's the reference peak, and all these other peaks are being compared to that peak, and that's how you're getting your jitter value. So this 56 is comparing this orange with the blue. This 25 is comparing this teal with the blue. You can manually pick a different reference peak just by selecting this icon, and that will make that particular peak the reference peak. So if I want the red one to be reference, I just click this icon. If I want to go back and have it auto choose, this icon goes back to the auto select reference peak. The reason you may want to do that is maybe you want to exclude one of these peaks. Maybe we didn't like the blue peak, so we could choose a different peak and then exclude the blue peak from the data set. So we just come in here and uncheck this box in the blue peak, which gets rid of that peak, and now we can use auto reference, and it will refine the best peak to use as a reference peak. Once you're finished collecting all the data you want, you can look in the results table. Here you'll see the runs. So here's a run 2, and it had a single pair, and then here's the results. Run 3, we can see here it had 4 different pairs. That's because there were 5 peaks present, and then you can see the results for each pair here. Down below you can see your mean, total percentage blocking, mean jitter, etc. You can choose to look at the data in the histogram view, and this is showing you each box here represents a different run. So this is run 4.3, and this is actually showing you the jitter value for each peak. So in this case, these 4 boxes that lit up here represent the 4 jitter values we got from the different pairs. So in this case, you can see the reference peak was this light green peak, and this is the jitter value for the blue, the green, the red, and the orange. In your report, you can have the report set up to show the results table. You can also include the histogram if you want, as well as the traces. Those are all optional things that you can add to the report. You'll notice in the buffer, you can see that there's multiple, there's a lot of data collected, and we're only analyzing the last part. We're only analyzing enough data to collect 100 traces. If we increase this number to 150 or 200, you can see now it's analyzing more of that buffer. If you have a different pair or any other data you want to analyze somewhere early on in the buffer, you can actually get multiple analysis out of a single buffer. So we can go down to new analysis, and what that's going to do is it's going to save this analysis and copy it. So if I hit new analysis, you'll notice that we're in 4.2. 4.1 is still there, so we haven't lost anything. It's just given us a copy of that. And now we can go through and analyze a different section of this buffer. It's already analyzing the beginning section here, but we can just click and drag a box around the section we want to analyze. That's going to zoom that section in, and then click Analyze, and it's going to analyze that particular section of data. If you zoom back out, you can see compared to the other section that's already been analyzed, this is our second section of that same buffer, and that's why the run is called 4.2, because it's all based on the same buffer. So you have a 4.1 and a 4.2 run. And you can do as many analysis on these buffers as you want, so we can do a new analysis again. And here we're going to just select this section of data and reanalyze. And then if I zoom out, I can see I've analyzed 3 different sections of that buffer, and the results are all down below here. So if you do have different mode units showing up, or different pairs showing up in the same buffer, it's easy to go back through the buffer and analyze those separately at the end. This window here is an optional window that allows you to manually add results to the results table. So if you may have a patient that isn't very cooperative and you can hear the jitter but you can't quite grab it in the analysis, you can manually add jitter or blocking or normal pairs to the results table using these buttons here. If you want to go into a stimulated mode, you can go back to the navigator and choose stimulated, and then choose the muscle that you want to test. And the only difference with stimulated mode is that you now have the stimulus activated. So you have the stimulator set, and you can choose a single stimulation to find where you want to stimulate. And then once you have a single stimulation and you see a twitch in the muscle, you can click 3 Hertz, and now it's going to automatically stimulate at 3 Hertz. And then once you get a nice motor units firing, you can make that a little bit faster, up to 10 Hertz, and now you'd be stimulating at 10 Hertz. And what would be happening when using stimulated mode is you'll see a stim artifact, and then you'll see each peak of the motor unit compared to that stim artifact. That's what your jitter values will be coming from. If you would rather not use the stim artifact for your reference peak, you can click on this icon in the live window, and that's going to turn on the trigger, and now you're going to be able to use any of the peaks in the motor unit as the reference peak, just like you could in volitional mode. So you can either manually pick one or click auto reference to choose the reference peak. And just so you know, the yellow knob will actually adjust the trigger line. So like I said before, the trigger is enabled to be in auto mode by default, but by turning the yellow knob, you then have manual control of the yellow trigger line. You can also adjust it with your mouse. If you want to delete any peaks or pairs, you can either uncheck them, like I showed before, or you can just go to the results table and right click and delete, and that's going to delete just this single peak. If you want to delete the entire analysis, just push F2 to delete the analysis, which will delete the run and any peaks in that run. Thank you for watching. This was a tutorial on single fiber EMG+.